Hello, everyone. I'm going to get straight into this. I'm going to read out a report from the Times, and this report is from the 10th of September. It's a weekend edition. It's the day they feature King Charles III's session from the a session council. That is the formal proclamation. So this edition, historic edition, actually. But for once, I'm not talking about anything to do with the huge events that we've seen in recent days. I've already said a lot about that. No doubt there will be more to say. For now, I just want to read out this report. It concerns the Oberlin College in Ohio in the United States. And if you bear with me, it's a little bit lengthy, but I think it's important to read out everything for the context because I really hope this case is a turning point. I don't think it will be, but hopefully lessons will be learned. Before I get into this, just a quick word about the Swedish general election. The Sweden Democrats, the far right party, has done well, and interestingly, this is partly in response, certainly to immigration, but also rising crime. Um, Now, I'm not going to go out of my way to glorify them or defend them. Apparently, they do have a neo-Nazi past, so there's going to be some shady ideology going on there. However, um, when you look at what's going on in Sweden, it's not surprising that they have done well because it seems that the Swedish left and the Swedish establishment are not really paying attention. Just reading out from the Times again, this report by Oliver Moody. The country has the second highest level of fatal shootings per capita in Europe, only after Croatia, and is the only state in the continent where the numbers are increasing. So much for liberal, peaceful Sweden. This is becoming quite a dangerous country by European standards. Um, so when people see violent gangs out of control, even in liberal Sweden, they want tougher responses. And this is what's happened. Meanwhile, in the UK, before getting to the main report, just because it's also related to the subject of crime, yet another case of a useless judge, in my opinion. This report's by James Beale. Baby killer mother spared jail. A mother who shook her 10-week-old daughter to death was told she could look forward to her future yesterday as she was spared a jail sentence. Now, this is an odious example of someone's ambitions being used as an excuse to let them off the hook. Basically, there's no other way to look at it. Lauren St. George, 25, inflicted traumatic head injuries and 18 rib fractures in Lily May 6 days after she was discharged from hospital in January 2018. The mother attacked the baby in a fit of rage hours after she was told by a social worker she would have to go into a residential unit with her daughter if she wanted to keep her. Staff at Barnet Hospital in North London felt that she hardly cared about the baby, so why would they ignore it? St George of Enfield, North London, was convicted of infanticide, which carries a maximum sentence of life in prison, in July, but cleared by an Old Bailey jury of murder. A Wood Green Crown Court in North London yesterday, Mr. Justice Spencer, useless fool, heard how she wished to pursue further education. He sentenced her to 2 years in prison, suspended for 2 years, along with a 12-month supervision order and 60 days rehabilitation requirement. He told her, "You now have a future to look forward to." An absolutely disgraceful decision. I think sometimes when we talk about child murder and especially the murder of babies, we forget that they're innocent children, but they're also human beings. Now, if she killed actually an adult, then I mean, this is grotesque. He told her, "You now have a future to look forward to." She's literally being rewarded. Her ambitions are being considered, not the fact that she's killed someone, a defenseless baby. An outrageous, disgraceful decision by this useless judge, Mr. Justice Spencer. And it's yet another example of how absurdly incompetent a lot of our judges are. Because, some people say, "Oh, well, their hands are tied." The maximum sentence available is life in prison. But even if there's mitigating circumstances, 2 years suspended for taking a little baby's life. She clearly has a violent streak. And the idea that she should be rewarded I'm sorry, this wasn't what I was going to talk about, but I felt it was important to mention it because all three reports I'm looking at are connected to crime. But anyway, disgraceful decision, disgraceful. Well, actually, it's useful that I'm mentioning all three because the three different legal jurisdictions: the United States, the UK, and Sweden. Um, and clearly, all three see problems. In Sweden, there's long been complacency about crime, and the super soft approach there clearly has failed. In this country, we're not quite as soft as Sweden, but we're not much better, really. Sentencing in Britain continues to be pathetic. I do think violent women generally get more lenient treatment than violent men. So much for equality. I mean, what do feminists have to say about that? And as for the United States, well, I'll get into the report. Bear with me because it's important uh, see, to know the whole context of this. The report's by Will Pavia in New York. Like I say, this is from the 10th of September, so it's just over a week ago, but still relevant. A liberal university in Ohio is to pay $36.6 million to a local bakery after students and staff falsely accused it of racism because an employee chased and restrained a black student um, he had seen shoplifting. I think I may have mentioned this case before, but this is the conclusion. On Thursday, Oberlin College's Board of Trustees said it would pay damages awarded by the Ohio Court of Appeals, ending a 5-year dispute that triggered a nationwide debate over race, criminal justice, and free speech. The court upheld a jury verdict that Oberlin was liable for libel, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with a business. Oberlin College students staged demonstrations outside Gibson's Bakery in November 2016, a day after three black students were arrested and accused of attempting to steal from the store. Alan Gibson, a grandson of the owner, said he saw one of the students, a young man, hiding two bottles of wine in his coat. Gibson chased him across the street and tackled him. Two young female students then attacked Gibson, according to a police officer. So these students, clearly not bothering to see the facts, they decided to tackle the shop owner. All three students were arrested and later pleaded guilty to misdemeanor charges. At the sentencing, Jonathan Allen, who pleaded guilty to attempted theft, read a statement acknowledging that Gibson was justified in trying to restrain him and that his actions had not been racially motivated. So for 5 years, this guy knew he was in the wrong, but he never bothered to correct that, to be honest. However, his initial arrest, which came the day after Donald Trump was elected president, caused outrage on a campus with a long history of progressive activism. Students and staff believed the trio had been attempting to purchase alcohol underage with fake identification. Oberlin, founded in 1833, was America's first interracial and coeducational college. It was also a stop on the Underground Railroad which helped escape slaves. In the past, its canteen has become embroiled in a revolt against its servings of sushi and General Tso chicken sandwich after allegations of cultural appropriation. That sounds about right. That's the sort of thing that so-called progressives weigh in on nowadays. In the aftermath of the student arrest, a flyer circulated calling for a boycott of the bakery, which is described as a block capitals racist establishment with a long account of racial profiling and discrimination. It accused Gibson of racially profiling the young man and improperly chasing and assaulting him, or maybe just defending his grandfather's business. Several hundred students protested outside the bakery in the 2 days that followed. The Student Senate passed a resolution making similar claims that they posted in a student centre. During its libel action, Gibson's Bakery said that the college vice president Meredith Raimondo had attended the protests, calling a witness who said he had seen her handing out flyers and telling students that they could make more copies in the college's conservatory office. An absolute disgrace of her. You know, it's one thing lefty students doing this, but that's utterly shameful. The college also instructed the company supplying its dining hall to stop ordering food from Gibson's Bakery, according to court papers. The college maintained that Raimondo had a duty to attend protests off campus to ensure they took place peacefully and argued students had a right to exercise freedom of speech by harassing a victim of crime. Victims of crime. Lawyers for the bakery who sued the college alleging defamation presented text messages between members of staff at the college in which they expressed support for the protests. The college's interim assistant dean attended the court hearing where the three students were convicted, calling it the most egregious process and adding, "I hope we rain fire and brimstone in that store." Talk about inflammatory. In a text message to Raimondo, after a retired professor at the college criticized the way it had handled the incident, Raimondo texted another administrator saying, and I quote, "Fuck him. I'd say I'll unleash the students if I wasn't convinced this needs to be put behind us," according to court papers. Attorneys for the Gibson family cast it as a victory for David over Goliath and said they were grateful that the court recognized the rights of individuals rather than the bullying tactics of the big institutions. Well, it's the right outcome. I'm pleased they've got a hefty payout, and it is hefty, $37 million. I doubt a small business would make that in a year or 10 years. Um, but they shouldn't have had to go through this for 5 years. I mean, consider this: these people were victims of crime, of a shoplifter. Small businesses have to pay for supplies. I'm sure it's similar in the United States, the UK. This isn't some big mega chain like Starbucks or Walmart. It's a small business, and they had to put up with this mob of left-wing so-called progressive students, no doubt hounding them. It's absolutely disgusting and revolting that victims of crime in America have to go through that because of the way the left weaponizes race. I mean, those two students that initially intervened, did they bother to check the circumstances? No. Shame on them. Shame on the shoplifter for not being upfront and admitting that he was indeed shoplifting. I mean, in 5 years, did he find his conscience and think, well, yeah, maybe I should just be upfront about this? Now, the American left will point to other cases of miscarriages of justice, like I think they were called the Manhattan Five, five young black men who were falsely convicted in 1990 of the Central Park case that was. So yeah, I get it. America also has that problem. Um, and recently there was Mr. Woodfox who spent 43 years in solitary confinement, black man, for a crime he didn't commit. A disgraceful travesty of human rights. But the American left do not come out squeaky clean. Their knee-jerk attitude to race, where they don't bother to check the facts, where they just assume that racism must be at play. So in this case, instead of considering, well, maybe the shop owner or his grandson were simply defending themselves, oh no, it must be racism because the thief was black. Now, it goes without saying, had the thief been white, they wouldn't have cared. In fact, they probably would have supported the business. So this is what is so blind about the so-called progressive left. I say so-called, I don't even like using the term progressive because as an adjective, forget the politics, as an adjective, progressive should mean forward thinking. And how is mob justice, false allegations, forward thinking? And people might say this is an isolated case. I don't think it is. There was that case in upstate New York. I think it was some boys from Covington. I forget the name of the institution involved, but again, they were falsely smeared as being far right racists. And left wing publications shamelessly edited their coverage of that. Don Lemon of CNN, on air was vilifying one of the young men involved, saying what he would like to do to him. This is a senior journalist. In the end, the Washington Post and some other publications had to pay him defamation costs. Now, none of this means that there isn't racism in America. None of this means that there aren't innocent black people being falsely accused of things. I'm not saying that. But I am saying the way that the left treats crime in general. I mean, they like to abolish prisons, defund the police, and other such nonsense. Um, but when you consider this, what we've actually seen is victims of crime being hounded. What sort of message does that send out? Oberlin, um, they have blocked their Facebook page from comments. No doubt they've had a lot of abuse, and I've no sympathy with them because this was a David and Goliath situation. You have a prominent large institution deciding to bully a small business. And as for their excuses, oh, well, this administrator simply had a duty to be there, see it went off peacefully. Rubbish. Clearly an ideologue. Clearly was stirring up the students' emotions. As for the students, you know, these are young men and women who are going to go out into the real world. They need to, I hope they learn something from this. And I think if any of them are seen harassing this business further, the Oberlin should learn its lesson and suspend them. Um, what's troubling in America, and yeah, you get it on the right as well, you get the Trump cultists, I get that, you get the Second Amendment fanatics, but on the left, it's always around the issue of race, and it's always this thing about, well, let's just disregard the facts. I mean, the Justice Smollett case shows that there are people who are not above lying. Um, And then, left wingers who just jump on the bandwagon. They don't bother to consider is it true or not. They say it's a disgrace. They get into this. There's something very ugly about what's happening in the United States nowadays. And I think you get extremes on left and right. I'm not exonerating the right extremes, but I do think when it comes to the issue of race, overall, the left are far more guilty of stirring up the flames. They don't bother to check the facts. Every single time a black suspect is apprehended or questioned, it must be racism. And the basis for this is because there is a history of institutional racism in America. There is. But that doesn't mean that every single time you have a black thief and he or she happens to be caught, then, well, they must be innocent because they're black. I mean, Martin Luther King would be shunning that sort of mindset. He would be saying, judge someone on their character, not on the color of their skin. And I feel sad about the way America is right now. We're not much better. We're not quite at this sort of level. But sometimes when I see some of the things going on in London, most recently there was that guy who was shot by the police. Now, in that case, he was unarmed. So it's right that there's an independent inquiry. It's right that if it's found that he had done absolutely nothing wrong, then, um, police officers should be held accountable. They should be facing charges. They need to explain why did they shoot an unarmed man. So I can understand the anger over that, but Black Lives Matter is going to polarize people if they start getting into a whole thing about, if they start turning it into white versus black rather than just saying we want these officers held to account. Now, I haven't looked at that case closely, so I want to be cautious what I say about it. But I understand that the man who was shot was in a stolen car. I'm not saying that justifies it, but all the details of this case are going to have to be looked at. Apparently, with what was happening with the state funeral, it was the investigation was temporarily put on hold. Um, I do think it's important the new Metropolitan Police Commissioner takes these things seriously. I think any evidence of abuse of power, there needs to be zero tolerance to that. Because if you have corrupt officers who are abusing their position, they're not fit to wear a uniform. And they're dangerous actually to the public and to the force. Having said that, I think Black Lives Matter is guilty of fanning flames because they're not content with just saying we want police officers held to account. They put out this narrative that every single time a black suspect is apprehended, it is racism. And I've seen BLM people saying, well, no justice, no peace. In other words, we refuse to work with the police. Now, I maintain corrupt officers need to be held to account. It's a disgrace when you have police officers who are abusing their power and they're not held to account. And I do think some conservatives are a bit blind to that. I think there's some real rotten eggs within Metropolitan Police ranks. But, and I know I'm digressing here, but I'm just talking about, how the situation is in this country. But people also need to appreciate they have an enormously pressurizing job. I mean, they're tasked with policing a city of 9 million people. Um, they have major events like what we've just seen, the Queen State funeral. They have demonstrations. They have political summits. Um, And, more often than not, they have to put up with a lot of personal abuse. So I do believe in empowering the police, but I also believe that police who abuse that power should be held to account. This to me seems like a reasonable proposition. As for the Oberlin College, if we see any similar situations in the UK, I hope we look at this and think, well, hold back a second. Let's look at the facts of the case. I don't think we're quite at the level of toxicity as you see in the US, but we're not too far off. There are definitely intolerant, bullying, woke activists in this country. There are woke professors um, who are teaching hate to their students. And as an example of the way race is handled in this country, and I've quoted this a few times, a few years ago, the University of Sheffield was paying students to monitor each other for microaggressions. This is another thing that's lamentable about the woke left, how they conflate, for example, cultural appropriation with really unpleasant racial bullying. I mean, they lump it all together. So, in other words, if you have a white student or an Asian student who appreciates, say, reggae music, well, that's cultural appropriation. If someone is making conversation, oh, where are you from? And the student happens to be from another part of the world, well, that must be racism. I absolutely loathe the woke left and their tactics and their manipulative, dishonest approach to things. I think what they do is pretty despicable. Um, I also abhor racism. I don't think anyone should have to put up with it. And I've seen cases up here in the northeast where there's been some drunk white louds who have hurled racist abuse at minority people. So I'm not blind to that. It does happen. But so much of what the running theme, if there's a running theme from all the things that's spoken about in this video, it should be common sense. Just common sense. So I hope the Oberlin College case, I hope lessons are learned from it. I hope the woke left will look at that, but they're terrible at introspection. They're incapable of it. But I would hope that something is learned from this, which is don't rush to judgment. Maybe if a store owner is apprehending someone, they've caught them in the act, and it isn't a question of racial profiling. Now, had this happened and it turned out the student hadn't stolen anything, then yeah, that would be cause there for saying the business overreacted and maybe there was racial profiling involved. Of course, there's another inconvenient truth, and this was the case in the Los Angeles riots in 1992. If you do have a situation where a business is experiencing more thefts, frankly, from African Americans than other people, then naturally they're going to be more cautious. If that means racial profiling, it's unfortunate. I don't think people should be judged on the color of their skin. I don't think that honest black shoppers should be treated as if they're potential thieves. But I would say to black community leaders, fix the problem in your community. Why is there so many African Americans disproportionately involved in crime? Why? And that isn't race baiting, that's reality. There's simply a disproportionate situation going on there. Um, in fact, in the LA riots, what happened was there was tensions between the black community and the Korean community because it was deemed that Korean shopkeepers were doing better, and black people were in poverty at the time, and there were tensions going on there. Korean shopkeepers were suspicious of um, black people, and things spiraled out of control. I'm sick and tired of minority criminals getting a free pass, by which I mean this assumption that the left always makes. Well, if they're caught, it must be racism. Of course, it doesn't help that you have a situation where there has been a history of racism. So it's just balancing act of judging. Well, yeah, there's that dark history. Yes, black people have been treated grossly unfairly. That does not mean every black person is innocent. And this is what the woke left, on the white woke left and the black woke left, they're guilty of conflating things. They're guilty of distortion. They're guilty of saying because there has been this history, then we're going to treat every single case as if the black person must be innocent and the white person must be a racist. It's far, far, far too easy. If America has a problem with racism, America also has a problem with its left wing faction absolutely weaponizing this loaded term. Everything's racist to the left. And that is utterly reprehensible how they weaponize that very loaded term. The problem shouldn't be ignored. And I don't say the problem doesn't exist. I'm saying that to weaponize it the way they do and to use it out of all context is despicable. Right, I'll wrap this up. There are a few things I want to cover there, but I felt what was important. I just hope that this country doesn't experience the level of. We've already experienced some of it, but not quite to the levels of the US. But the next time you see a business being hounded, supposedly for being racist, people should remember this case.